In a previous video, I talked about how to conduct a descriptive phenomenological analysis. I used some general techniques, reading for the sense of the whole, free imaginative variation, how I approach a new protocol or a new interview transcript, and the things that I'm looking for and how I feel it all kind of draws together. But in the comments, some people asked for an example of how to divide the interview up into meaning units. And that's a fantastic suggestion. And I've had students ask me the same thing. So this is a video going through that process. I've got an extra interview. So this came in after I completed my most recent analysis. And I got, I think, 2 additional interviews that some of my co-researchers had conducted but hadn't transcribed. And so those came in to me afterwards. And I found that as reading through them, all of the analysis that I'd already completed wasn't changed by these new interviews, so I hadn't gone through and broken them up and analyzed them separately. I didn't see anything that stood out. If I did see something that stood out, then I'd have to go through that process. So these are undivided interviews, and I'll take a look at them with you. So I have, let me share with you the interview itself, the transcript, and I've got some comments about how it was transcribed. And then I've got this Excel file opened as well, and so I've got the units there along the leftmost column, a summary column, and the psychological significance column. So we will add some meaning units in here and go through that process. So here is how I do it. So I've got this interview. It is kind of stretched out, and notice the transcriber gave each comment from the interview its own line. And so, for example, was given its own line. I would probably put these little one-line phrases in brackets and put it right here. And we can indicate that it was the interviewer that said it. That way it wouldn't break up everything that the interviewee was saying. You get the sense that it's more of one continuous description rather than a bunch of broken up dialogue. And of course, the broken up dialogue is how we often talk. We say things like, we're acknowledging that the speaker is continuing to go. But I'm not going to go through and break all that up right now. That's just how I would like to see it personally. So we've got, I guess let me just read through it. How do your tattoos connect to your sense of identity? All right, so boom. To understand that, it got to be like, can I explain when I first started getting tattoos? Yeah, you can say it however you want. So let me pull myself up. As I'm reading through this, I'm trying to get a feel for what's being described. So the whole topic here is the meaning of tattoos. There are a couple of specific questions, tattoos related to identity, how people perceive your tattoos or how you imagine they perceive your tattoos. And we're looking to see how the interviewee, each respondent, constructs their descriptions. So what is it that they have to share, and how do they introduce it? How far into the past do they need to go to help you get the context? And when they describe it, what are the features without which they wouldn't be giving an adequate response? Now, they're not thinking through it as explicitly as that. They're just sharing what comes to mind for them. And that reveals to us the structure that this tattoo meaning has for their consciousness, or for them specifically. And that structure is consciousness. And so that's what we're trying to examine. So let's go back to the description. Can I explain when I first started getting tattoos? So this is a little bit of context. All right. So when I first started getting tattoos, I was 16. When I was 16, I just wanted everybody, tattoos was just something to look upon like, oh, he got a tattoo. It made it seem like you've grown or you older in quality, if that makes sense, okay? And a lot of females like it at the time period, but I wanted something that recognized me, so I got hate love. At the time period I was in was a lot of hatred in my heart that I didn't really kind of like anything that dealt with love. I had a trust no one mentality. And so let me go back here. So this interviewee is looking back into their past and thinking about the social context within which they got a tattoo. And so we're already seeing a bit of a picture being painted here. So in order to understand how tattoos connect to respondent 7's identity, you have to know that a lot of people were getting them, and what was the vocabulary that was used? It made you seem grown up or older, if that makes sense. And girls seemed to like it. So I wanted something that recognized me, so I got hate love. We don't know what that means yet. I guess a lot of hatred in his heart. And I didn't really kind of like anything that dealt with love. So it's a kind of an ironic tattoo. So there's a social context, there is this growing up context, or at least idea of growing up, and a self-representation, but almost an ironic self-representation. So a tattoo that was unlike others, something unique. Notice what I'm describing here is one image, one painting, one portrait, if you will. And so we're dealing with one meaning unit. So if I were to highlight it, all of this so far would be a single meaning unit. I'm going to keep on reading and see if they continue this way. So I got the tattoo, hate love. After that, I just became like very, very like hyper tattoo. All right, so that is a shift. So it goes from the meaning, the motivation for getting the original tattoo, and then this shift in their desire. Now they have to get lots of tattoos. I just kept getting tattoos all over. So let me take this first meaning unit, and I'm not going to copy it and paste it into the Excel file. I'm going to describe it in a third person way. It's written in first person. The speaker is speaking about themselves. I'm going to transcribe it into a third person. So our very first meaning unit would be R7 described the social context. No, I'm already jumping into the psychological significance. R7 got a tattoo. Did he say he was 16? Yeah. When he was 16 years old. He said it was popular at the time. It made him seem older. And girls seemed to like tattoos. So I'm just describing in my own words kind of what was described. What R7 had said. So let me see. The tattoo in particular represented R7's dislike for love and trust. Because it was important for R7 not to be overly trusting. Now, I'm going to go into detail about what I almost jumped to, like I almost skipped a step. I just started describing the psychological significance because that's what I'm looking at, that's what I see, and so I almost jump over what was sort of being described. So the next part is this psychological significance key. Let me see if I can hold this on top. Yeah. R7 wanted a tattoo because tattoos made him seem older and more socially, or fit socially. Helped him to fit in socially. So we have both of those. There's developmental context and the social context. The tattoo represented R7's temperament and values at the time. Let me go back and take a look. Oh, I guess we can just look right here. I guess in more detail, the tattoo significance of the tattoo helped R7 individuate from others. Make himself unique from others, stand out. So all of that's kind of going on. I'm reading between the lines psychologically here. What does this mean to a 16-year-old or someone reflecting back on their decision to get a tattoo at 16? And yeah, so that's the first meaning unit. So let me go back to the interview. And so remember, there was one shift, and if you want to kind of indicate the shift, you can just do a double, or I like to do this little double dash, and that shows me that the interview is kind of being broken up there. So the next one, I just became very hyper-tattoo-ish. So now there's this new thing talking about this shift that occurred, this desire to get lots of tattoos, until I found my identity in Christ, and now my tattoos have a whole different thing. There's another shift. So we've got the first one, the motivation for the first tattoo. That was the first meaning unit that we've described. The second one, this desire to get lots of tattoos. Let's go ahead and describe it. R7 became what he called hyper-tattoo-ish, which meant that he wanted lots of tattoos. Almost indiscriminately. He doesn't say that, but it seems implied. So I became very, very hyper-tattoo-ish, just kept getting tattoos all over. We can say, so that's what he described, and then the psychological significance. There grew a desire to get tattoos for the sake of getting tattoos. There was something about having lots of tattoos that R7 identified with. And they don't have to have any sort of significance, so we might call that perhaps aesthetic reasons, or this external third-person perspective reason to get tattoos. What will people think about them? And then already, so that was one line, we get into this, suddenly tattoos have a meaning, and that meaning has to do with R7's identity in Christ. So now we're going back to that previous, so this was a second meaning unit. My identity was to be hyper-tattoo mission, like, okay, I got a tattoo, let's get some more. On to now, like, okay, this is what I see in Christ. All right, so now, now I see there's almost this inner conflict, this desire to get lots of tattoos and how they looked cool, but then having this meaning, so there was this inner conflict. The desire for tattoos was there, but the reasoning was starting to shift, or like there was a conflict that was emerging there. So actually I'm starting to think that this is all part of the second meaning unit. Let me read a little bit more. There's a look, the feeling. So the interviewer asked, what was the reasoning behind that? Remember, I sort of assumed it was the look of them. So I think it was the look. Okay, R7 agreed. Next thing you know, so he liked the look. Next thing you know, I was like, let me get this. So this is still the second meaning unit, we'll say. There was that one little part about the conflict that emerged, but I'm gonna bracket that, sort of separate it out. We're still talking about the desire to get lots of tattoos, having them. I just wanted to see them, I wanted to have them, and then the meaning changed. Okay, so when I was back in the world, just getting tattoos just to get it, if that makes sense. My mama's name, things of that sort, you know, just getting tattoos. Philippians 4:13. Wasn't really a lot about it, but everyone had tattoos, so I'm like, okay, let me get that. And when I came to Christ, it just became a different meaning to like a sense of identity now. Now I realized, like, okay, tattoos is something that necessarily doesn't make me. I don't have to look for, now I'm confident in my identity. I don't have to look for, or I don't have to try to fit in. Notice we've got two meaning units that kind of shift back and forth. So there was this hyper-tattooish, there was more that was added to it, and so he actually said getting tattoos just for the sake of getting tattoos, a desire to look cool and fit in, and then a shift R7 describes a shift that occurred, namely his coming to Christ and the desire to make his tattoos more meaningful, or rather, no longer a need to use tattoos for the purpose of constructing his identity. I'm doing it again. I'm jumping to the psychological significance, and so I'm interpreting what he said. So actually, let's do this a little bit better. I'm going to put that over here in the significance. R7 said he was getting lots of tattoos and he wanted to fit in. There was no, let's see. There wasn't really a lot about it. There was no real purpose behind his tattoos. Actually, I'm describing the second meaning unit again, so let's move that there. R7 describes a shift that occurred after accepting Christ. Let's see what he says actually. Tattoos, something that necessarily doesn't make me. I'm confident in my identity. This led to him being more confident in his identity. And I could infer from that he's he doesn't need the tattoos now to like represent himself. Don't have to look for, I don't have to fit in with anybody else based on what stood out to me. Now tattoos were selected for more personal reasons. So over the first three meaning units here, we have the initial motivation, this hyper tattoo craze, but without any real purpose, and then this shift in that occurred in his personality and his identity, this solidification of his identity, no longer the need to have tattoos to represent himself. Thinking now about the analysis that I've already done, this shift between like getting tattoos for the sake of getting them to having this personal intrinsic reason, that doesn't have to happen, but what it shows us is the contrast between the qualities of tattoos that are obtained for the purpose of simply obtaining tattoos, this kind of transient fitting in social quality, and this more enduring, meaningful tying to parts of the identity. Not identity construction per se, but connecting to enduring qualities or aspects of the identity. It shows how the meaning of tattoos, for the purposes of like fitting in, and then the purposes of an enduring identity, are quite different, or they can be quite different. Even the same tattoo can have both when the person sort of shifts that awareness, that reason for getting tattooed, the motivation. So I hope, I'm not going to go through the entire interview, but I hope you get a sense of that process. There are a couple of other ways you can do it. You can simply read through the whole thing and just make a little mark when you notice that something seems to change. But when you do that, don't get tied to the marks, because remember earlier I had like notated the shift between I got one to fit in, and then I got tons, and I was a hyper tattoo craze, and then something changed, I accepted Christ, and so like I made another mark, and then I noticed that was almost prefacing something that will come later. Went back to this hyper tattoo craze, there were a couple of lines about that, and then the shift. And so if I had been wedded to the initial marks that I made, then I would have had to describe 6 different meaning units, but I would have been describing the same thing multiple times. So if you go through and you make your marks, and as you're describing one meaning unit and you go on to the next one, you'd be like, oh, this is more of the same, then just combine them. It's the same meaning unit, have a more thorough discussion or description of it, and then move on to the next one. And of course, you may find, like I did in this one, that they return to a previous meaning unit. Just make sure that the context of the meaning unit isn't fundamentally different. So this first time, this getting tattoos for the sake of getting tattoos, and then suddenly getting tattoos for the sake of getting tattoos seemed silly when he had this more enduring identity that was tied to something deeper than outward appearance. Now, if later in the interview, like 10 years down the road, he's describing the desire to get tattoos again because he wants them, we wouldn't combine that back with when he was 16 or 16 to 20 or so, because there's been all of this time of getting tattoos for a different reason. So it's like if he returns to the desire to get them because he likes the look of them, it would be something different. So maybe accepting about himself that part of his identity is wanting to look good, not this sort of flippant desire to be accepted, but more of a part of who he is this desire to be accepted, so accepting that part of himself. Like I said, I don't want to be completely thorough, go through the entire interview. That's not the purpose. I just wanted to walk you through the process and what that might look like, what some of those decisions are. I don't think the demarcation between meaning units is necessarily final, or I don't think it's going to change the outcome of your results, especially when you get to the psychological significance. You're going to find that, oh, wait a minute, I should have combined 2 and 3, so let's go ahead and combine them here, call them one meaning unit. Or, as you're describing them, you might find like you have to make 2 very different psychological descriptions. Okay, maybe that meaning unit needs to be divided into 2. Let's go back and read it and see where that shift occurred because I missed it. So don't feel like you're boxing yourself in when you do that process. I will say, let me disappear this, get it out of here. I will say, like going back to some of the previous ones that I did, it's a time-consuming process because you're really analyzing everything in depth. I do like the summary step. Notice I tried to skip it a couple of times, but I think it's a mistake to cut it out completely because it helps you as the analyst distance yourself from what's being described. And so if I read it and just imagine what it means, I might be inserting myself into it. So by going through the steps of typing out the third person description, this is R2 here, R7 here, not me. Okay, so now looking at this as something that's not me, what's the meaning of it in the context of this person's life based on what we know about them and the conversation that we're having. So I do like the summary step where we write it out in third person. I know in Georgie's book there's some cases where there's a second level of summary, and so it might be a really detailed summary here the first time. This would be translating every sentence into third person, and then this more summary style where you're kind of just sharing the important bits. So if you can do 3 columns too, where you start off maybe the entire text, and then a very detailed third person description, then a summative description, and then the psychological structure. So that would be 4 columns. But as you can see, I was comfortable just using 2. All right, that is, I guess that is it for now.